Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi. In this episode, let's consider what if. It's a different approach. Rather than encouraging transformation or asking anyone to adapt to new working dynamics, it's taking a step to the side and wondering how might things at work be reimagined. Perhaps with different expectations or simply taking a pause to contemplate what we each want for our working lives. Not fleeting gains this week, next week, or next month, but longer-term experiences and achievements. Most of us don't know what we really want at and of work. There were limited choices of what to do and how to do it. Being proactive was tough, being stoic made sense. Life happened outside the work box. The paradigm has shifted. As new working norms evolve, with new environments and new rules of engagement, we have many new options and opportunities. Let's intentionally lean into our working lives with a what-if orientation. How and where can you make the best of your time? What makes you happy? How can AI be your supportive team member, augmenting your capacity and catalyzing new potential? I'm delighted to be speaking with Daan van Rossum, the founder and CEO of FlexOS, where they are building the 21st century work experience that lets people learn, grow, connect, and thrive at work. Daan also hosts and runs the Lead with AI podcast, course, and community, helping executives stay ahead with AI. Hi, Daan. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you here.
Very good to see you. I always start at the beginning, and I actually couldn't work out from LinkedIn what you studied. It says general. I know you've done lots of different other courses. In 2019, you did a huge number of certificates, but your initial education, what were you focused on?
Here's the big reveal, Sophie. I dropped out of high school when I was 15 and I have not studied.
Why?
It's interesting. I was in school at the time. In the Netherlands, you have to stay in school until 16 at the minimum.
Okay.
But I was already working part-time alongside school. And I liked working a lot more than going to school. And at some point, I pitched it to my parents. I said, I think I want to do that and not show up for school. And they said, well, you can try that. And I had to ask the government to make an exception on that rule that you have to stay in school until 16. And after a couple of meetings with them, they approved it. And so then I actually got released, like officially released from going to school. And I started working full time.
So at 15, you were so determined to leave school that you managed to persuade your parents that you could then go and pitch the government. What managed to persuade them?
Well, my argument was that I think this is a better way for me to learn. I don't think I'm built to sit in a classroom and kind of learn along everyone at a kind of general pace. I wanted to go a lot faster. I wanted to learn a lot more. And I already had been working for quite a while at that point. And I said, I think I can just continue doing that. And I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot along the way. And that was enough to say yes. So they said yes. And I left.
Fascinating. If you're persuading people that you want to be able to learn faster and the school environment is not doing it for you, it's a good story. So what did you do with that?
Yeah, so I didn't leave school to do something extremely sexy or impressive. I was working at a help desk for an ISP.
Okay.
So this is really around the time that people started going online. And so they would encounter all kinds of technical issues, especially at that time. That was all quite new technology. And, people would get a router placed. And what the hell is a router?
And very frustrated customers.
Very frustrated customers, obviously. And I didn't have internet at home, so I was bluffing a little bit in trying to help people. But an ISP help desk, basically you pick up the phone and you say, did you try unplugging your router? Please do that and call back. And then you hope that your colleague picks up that call.
Right.
And then, yes, I met someone who was working on this idea of, hey, if you can find information online, then should you be able to buy things online? It wasn't quite there yet, right? 25 years ago.
Yeah.
But could you buy things online? And he loved eating pizza. So the idea was, could you order pizza online? And he had started to kind of program something, going to the library, getting books about coding,
all right,
building some things together, finding some services online where, our side would generate an email that would then go to a fax translator, and and a fax would come out in a restaurant, and then you would still completely pay offline. 25 years ago, it's basically no code programming.
So you basically digitized the very small pieces of the process that you could.
Exactly, yeah. And obviously, this idea caught on just slightly later.
Why did you join Media Highway?
Yeah, it's another crazy story. There was a newspaper article from when I was 10 with a big photo of me holding a self-made newspaper as my 10-year-old self, and said, the youngest editor-in-chief in the Netherlands. Every school vacation I had, I would take the train to my grandfather who lived 2 hours away. But I would stay with him for, maybe a week, and then we would always write a newspaper about our family. We would get some, phone calls, and, we would hear stories through other people. We would write a little newspaper. And so eventually that caught the eye of a editor at a real newspaper, I would say. And they made it a big story. And then in that story, they asked me, so does this mean you want to be a journalist? Does this mean you want to write for a living? I said, no, absolutely not. I want to become a teacher. So maybe I was half right, half wrong. But definitely was not really looking to become a writer, but I was definitely very interested in digital, very interested in the internet as a whole. And so what happened is that during the time that I was working at this ISP help desk, there was a city where overnight a fireworks factory exploded.
Oh.
It was basically a fireworks factory that was in a neighborhood. So something caught on fire, all the fireworks exploded, but that's big enough for, houses to tear down and people to pass away. And again, this was very early days internet, right? So the idea of, you can find all the information online wasn't really there yet. You had news portals, you had news websites, some newspapers had digitized. Yeah. And so, but there wasn't really much in terms of, okay, you just go on Google and find whatever you need. So I created a page at that time, just basically collecting links to all the different things that were happening, trying to update it in real time, added like a bulletin board where people, ended up posting things like, I cannot find this person. If anyone has heard from them, please let me know.
Oh, wow.
And that again caught the eye of national media. And so it was mentioned on TV, it was mentioned on radio, it was mentioned in different articles where people said, oh, there's this 15-year-old guy who has created this page that, everyone has gone to find information. There must be some use in that. I think the media picked up on a couple of stories of people who found each other because, they were trying to find out, like, are my relatives still there? And that also caught the eye of the founder of that company that you just mentioned. And he said, like, well, we've been trying to build that kind of idea, a little bit like about.com, like topical pages about certain topics. And, wouldn't you want to make this your career? Like, do you want to join and basically do this for a living where you're going to try different topics and build similar pages? And that's how I joined that company. And that's when my real work started.
It says you do some video even then. The internet wasn't very supportive of video.
The founder had this idea of digital concepts that are currently working in maybe the US or another market where they're really popular, but we are not there yet. So can we introduce them basically to the Netherlands? I was always in content, but in different kind of disciplines.
You moved to Ogilvy. Why the move to Ogilvy? And then also, that was when you started to move around the world.
The honest answer is that there was just like a lot of imposter syndrome and a sense of inferiority just from not having studied and not having done the formal education path. And I kind of wanted to see, almost like test the market.
Sure.
Could I land a real job?
Yeah.
I just applied for a bunch of jobs. And then Ogilvy was crazy enough to hire me. The hiring manager said, there are not many people currently that know how to use CMSs and how to upload content and how to create content. I ended up working there for Ford Motors, for IBM, and for American Express.
You're working at Ogilvy, you go to New York. What was that experience like? Going from a smaller agency in the Netherlands to Ogilvy in the advertising heart of the world.
It was incredible. And it all came about, not unlike other transitions, a little bit with just luck. I've been there for maybe like a year and a half. And Ogilvy globally was transitioning its leadership. And the new CEO basically said, I need to understand, what I need to be building towards. And if we're talking about the future of the agency and the future of advertising, we should ask our young talent. So he called out this big talent competition. He asked every office locally, and they had like 150 offices, to nominate 2 people that could write an essay about what the future of the company should look like and the future of advertising should look like. And I wrote something. I got great help from a local ECD who helped me really fine-tune it and really get to the core to write something that eventually I was in the final 11 that were now considered the leaders of the future. And our essays got printed and sent around the world. We basically won the opportunity to fly to the next big all-hands conference with the top 200 leaders from Ogilvy globally, and to present our essay there. So not terrifying at all.
What were 2 or 3 things that were in that essay?
Actually, something that was not at all digital and was not at all innovative. It was a very simple question, and that was, what if? And the whole thesis of the essay was basically, could we ask what if more? Instead of like trying to focus on all these like new channels, trying to be innovative, could we make this even better? So it was really more about the core of creativity and about curiosity. And how can you be so curious that you create something truly remarkable? And the interesting thing too was that we were finally at that conference. These were all people from all over the world. It was really a beautiful collective. But when we were doing our rehearsals and we were getting feedback on how to present, I realized I was the only one out of the 11 that focused on something positive. What could this be? Let's be curious. Everyone else had picked something that they thought was wrong with the company or wrong with the industry. There's something wrong with performance management. There's something wrong with career tracks. There may have been other stuff in the other essays, but that's what they picked to feature on stage. So that was an interesting distinction there.
So you stay at Ogilvy, you move from New York to Chicago, and then you go to Asia. You go to Singapore, first of all. Having lived in Asia myself, it's so stimulating. It's so different. What drew you to Singapore? What were you looking for in the position, but also the location?
New York to Chicago was interesting because Chicago to me was more real US. I was so curious about living in the Midwest and being in Chicago. But eventually, I did find Chicago quite cold. I always wanted to move to Asia. I had visited through my old job China when I was maybe 16, 17. There was nothing like it. And it was just like going into a completely different world. I was like, oh, that would be so cool to live there one day. And so I always had that in the back of my mind. So eventually, when I realized I've made now 2 transitions, like I see that it's possible if you just network and meet the right people. So I wanted to work in Japan. I booked a trip. I asked people in the network, do you know someone at Ogilvy Japan? Could I meet them? And I set up some meetings. And I just went there with the idea of I'm going to go lobby for them to move me here. And so I ended up extending the trip to a full 2 weeks. I got permission to work from Asia for that second week. So I spent the first week in Japan, the second week in 4 countries, and just tried to meet as many people as I could. I eventually got that position in Singapore.
Knowing how different Asia is, you're dealing with so many different cultures at the same time in very specific countries. How did the content of your job and how you needed to approach it change as you moved to Singapore and then the transition to Vietnam?
The benefit that I had is that I was a strategist. Within the advertising world, you're basically an account handler, you're a strategist, or you're creative. And then now it gets more into production and creation. But as a strategist, the whole job is to understand people that you don't know anything about. My first gig in New York was to go on the phone and interview farmers in the south of the US. I worked for IKEA. They had their target audience of mostly moms and heads of households. I worked for a bank You're always going into target audiences you don't know anything about. And that is a skill that's actually very transferable because no matter where you are in the world, your first job is basically to go and interview people where you need to have that curiosity to want to understand them, what makes them tick, what is your life like, and what does the world look like for you.
Which then helps you empathize and assimilate. Love that.
And you need to be, again, extremely curious about what could we make of what I'm learning and truly wanting to understand people to their core, what's under that and what does that mean, right? I think the job of the strategist is to translate what you hear into something that people get of like, okay, that's something really interesting. And now we can build something around that, right? So that was not that difficult of a transition. And that was a regional role. So I was traveling pretty much like every week to one of the other countries in Southeast Asia. And I just found Vietnam so fascinating because it had everything you just mentioned, but kind of on steroids in terms of it's still a very young society. A lot of things are still changing. A lot of things are completely new. And when I was there in focus groups, because I would talk to two very interesting target audiences. One was teen girls, and one was moms. And you learn a lot about a society when you talk to teen girls and when you talk to moms in terms of, again, the underlying things of like, what does society expect from you? What is it like to be a woman in that society?
Oh, very different.
What kind of world do you live in? And the thing that really stood out to me is that like the energy there was just so high. Like people were so optimistic. In Singapore, it's kind of like a first world country. People go about their lives, they go about their job, even though the country didn't exist 60 years ago. And they're already kind of like in that sort of, okay, a little bit autopilot, right? You just do the thing that you need to do because you need to do this for work and climb up and then get that title and get that money and then you buy your house.
And the government has set it up very well. It has a very high functioning framework nudging you.
Yes.
In lots of ways to live your life in a positive and productive and contributing to society and the rest of it type of a way, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the whole kind of behavioral psychology of, how could you use like small nudges to get people to where we would collectively agree that for most people, this is the right way. Beautiful system.
That works. Now to go somewhere where it's more
entrepreneurial, where the energy is high, where things can still happen, where there's still that sort of hunger for what could this be, right? Not just like what is it and how do we optimize that, but what could it be? And that's what I saw in Vietnam everywhere. It was such a short time ago that it was still a very poor country and really the first generation of people growing up with reasonable wealth. And in the 10 years that I've been there, that has accelerated incredibly. But even at that point in time, you could just see that. So I pitched to my boss at that time, if I have a regional role anywhere, it doesn't really matter where in the region that I'm living, right? Can I just move there? Oh, and by the way, can I keep my Singapore salary? Because that's a lot more than what I would earn in Vietnam. Somehow I made a compelling pitch. So I moved there. It was just fascinating to really understand people at a much deeper level and Asia at a much deeper level. It's focus group. And that's really where my journey to happiness started. What I would always hear is this idea of like, I feel that I'm in between two worlds. Daytime, I'm going to a cool job at a cool company in a really cool, vibrant city. Right. But in the weekends when I go to my hometown or once a year during Lunar New Year, when I go back to my parents and their neighbors and their friends, the expectations are still that, oh, but you're 25 years old. You should have been married already. You should have had a baby already. So there was such a big gap for people between the daily life that they were experiencing with all the modern experiences and the modern work environment, and then the very traditional expectations. Even 10 years later, it's still true.
For sure.
Well, my parents don't understand this company, and that therefore makes it a less attractive option because they want me to get something with job security where they know that I'm going to be well off because they remember what it was like to not know when their next meal would be.
Whether that person you're interviewing was in Vietnam or in the US or in Europe, it's the same thing. Parents still have those expectations. I recognize that younger workers are challenged by the mismatch of understanding of where we are, which is causing quite a lot of tension and stress and anxiety as well.
Oh, yeah.
So this is very early days, 2016. You decide to do something different and you have a co-founder to launch Bright, The Journey to Happiness. Love the title.
Nice, right? I was kind of getting tired of advertising. There is something very interesting about studying people and finding something that could create something new, but then it gets fitted into, okay, how do we use that to sell more Coca-Cola? That was my last client I worked for. I could see how people spend their whole life. And again, the people right above me, that those were people who spent decades in advertising. That's great. It's just not for me. My intellectual curiosity, I think, was fed, and there wasn't really that much more that I could learn, and I couldn't really move up that much more in what I was doing. So that's why I started looking around. What could I do? Can I do something for myself? I really wanted to start my own company, and eventually founded this company and really focused on, okay, some of these stories we've been hearing about these people feeling caught in between two generations, and also feeling that they really have to live for other people. And that is still the case, but that opinions of others, like parents, like neighbors, like people in your hometown, matter more than your own happiness, than your own purpose. The whole idea was using the medium of storytelling. Can we share stories of people who did find a better way of living, who did maybe start a charity or started their own company or became an influencer, which was really the hot job at that point in time. And could we share their stories, what they got out of that, but also how they got there? Because the assumption at that point in time was that the people who made it, who were self-sustaining and who seemed to have broken away from the traditional model of pick one of the four big professions, legal, medical, etc., and are doing now something that they truly love doing. The idea seemed to be that, they are just lucky, right? Yeah. They got famous on Instagram, or their small business just took off. And I think that's very normal for people to think when you look at someone who's successful. That must be an overnight success. Usually it's an overnight success 20 years in the making, right? A lot has contributed and led to that moment where suddenly something works, right? A lot of pivots, a lot of pain and all that. So really trying to share these stories of but they did come from very similar position as you, the reader, but here's the actions they took. Here is the steps that they took. And we mix that with a bit more general content. You cannot, write 100 pages just about people's journeys and happiness, but we did a bit about well-being and about fitness and about all the things that contribute to happier living. And as I was writing that, I realized, and I think this is, you may have experienced it too, but whenever you're trying to teach something, wherever you're trying to write something, it's sort of like the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you realize how little you know about a topic. And so, yes, we could report on these stories, we could share these stories, but do we actually know what makes people happy? At that point in time, I didn't. I had found out some things maybe the hard way, but not really to that degree. So that's where I started, a course in positive psychology, started studying, started interviewing people, really on like, what are really the core pillars of what makes one person flourish and another person just kind of run their life on autopilot? And are those things that are genetically determined, or are those things that you can actually take action on? And that then became really the main foundation for everything following. Are there things that you can take action on where you can have autonomy and agency in what your life looks like, right? We can all complain about a bad boss or a bad company, but what is the role that you can take to create that dream life of yours, right? So I did my life coaching certification.
It's very interesting to see the range of things that you chose to study, from psychology, women in leadership, leadership and change, inspiring leadership, through into emotional intelligence and positive psychology, all in 2019. Then you also move on from this company, Bright, and you found and lead DreamPlex.
Well, there was a big problem, Sophie, with Bright, which was that great mission, great idea, maybe terrible commercial model. Like, people in their early teens in Vietnam, in the developing market, are not going to pay you money to help them be happy. People were really excited about it, and some of the things that we did, because we had some products, we had some courses. People would post about it. It would be viral, but that doesn't pay the bills. Maybe now it would be a much better time to do something like that. But at that time, that really wasn't a model that would be sustainable. And I ended up meeting someone through a mutual friend who had just assumed the CEO position in a network of co-working spaces that you mentioned. So took it over from the original founder, basically came out with the task to really professionalize it and to build it into a mature company and to build like a really big network in Vietnam of co-working spaces. And we got to talking. He came from a background of headhunting and recruiting, originally from New York. And he had led and exited a very big company, very much from that idea that actually work is maybe the place, or at least one of the places, where you can craft a happier life for yourself, right? If you're thinking about how to be happier. Well, having something meaningful to do and doing that with people that you like working with and achieving things, like those are actually all of the core pillars of PERMA, right? The positive psychology model for happiness. You have a purpose and you have, achievements that you see, and you have great relationships and you have meaning in your job. So we started talking about, maybe this idea of using content to help people along in their journey, on its own is not really sustainable. But if we would blend it into something that people have to pay for anyway, i.e. workspace, maybe that could work. And maybe that could then set us apart and not just be another office provider. And that's where this transition happened.
From all the study that you did, what were some of those core insights, epiphanies that you then wanted to ensure were part of the experience at DreamPlex?
So if anyone is listening who feels they could be slightly happier, at least, here is the main thing that I picked up, especially Laurie Santos, the Yale professor who does a very popular class on happiness. And it was actually the most enrolled class at Yale, and she turned it into an online class, and you can take it online for free. She starts by saying that the biggest problem with happiness is that we suffer from this phenomenon called miswanting, which is that we actually don't know what makes us happy. We actually think that we want things that will make us happy, but it's actually the other way around, right? So we think that certain things will give us happiness, and actually once we achieve them, they don't make us happy. They may even make us unhappy.
Okay.
And within that, there's this concept called the hedonic treadmill, the idea that if you go for a certain goal and you think that, like, I will be happy when, right? So I will be happy when I get that promotion. I will be happy when I land that client. I will be happy when I get that pay raise, right? I will be happy when I finally work for a credible company. You're still yourself, right? So then once you have that, there may be a temporary moment where you feel good and when you feel that you've accomplished something and maybe you are happy in the moment. But the deeper sense of happiness has to come from something bigger. And so you're kind of like on this treadmill where you just keep running towards goals, but every time you hit that goal, your hedonic adaptation kicks in and you basically adjust very easily. So now you went from 80,000 to 100,000 in salary. You're like, I've made it. 1 month later, that's just a monthly paycheck that comes in. You don't even think about it anymore. And then you inflate your lifestyle and now you're stuck in the 100K. You say, shit, what I really need is 150K. And you hear this, by the way. If you listen to a podcast of truly rich people, you hear this of people who have $10 million, who have $20 million. They say, but what I really need, now that I have 20, I realize I really need 100. Then you're really free. So number one is basically miswanting, that we have a wrong perception of what makes us happy. Number two is this hedonic treadmill that, going for a goal in order to be happy, that's not going to work. And then Sean Aker, another big speaker on this topic from Harvard, would say, you cannot go towards happiness, right? Happiness is the way. You have to basically find your happiness in the here and now. And that's the other big point. If you slow down and look around, actually all your conditions for happiness, they are already here. And that's really where I found from sort of the academic thinking on happiness, and then looking at living in Vietnam, where Buddhism is really big. That's exactly what the Buddhist teachers have been saying for thousands of years. Every source of happiness is available in the here and now. Everything that you need to be happy is in the here and now, because you wake up and you breathe. And you can look around you and you can see color, right? For most of us, that's the reality. And you have a roof over your head and you have to eat and you have to drink, right? Actually, and you have maybe great people around us. Everything we need already exists. The unhappiness comes from, there's some hole in myself that I'm trying to fill. So pick whatever, happened during your youth and make that your thing. And now I'm running around trying to get a title or a career or a salary or a bigger house or a bigger TV and you end up getting into this rat race. And so all those things I took with me and say, okay, first of all, happiness is very makeable. It's not something that either happens to you or you're born with it. It's something you actually determine almost 100% yourself. You have very famous twin studies actually from the Netherlands where they follow twins that have never met each other, separated at birth, where they basically show that your genetic disposition has very little effect on how happy you are in life, because twins are obviously identical. It's really all your context. It's really all your upbringing. Then what do you do with that, right? So as I'm now nurturing, you've done it with kids, right? As I'm now growing a person, right? How do you make them self-sufficient? How do you give them, that mindset of everything I can control? With that in mind, how can you treat your career in a very similar way? First of all, be happy with what you have right now. And what makes you happy at work, if you just forget about the paycheck, if you forget about sort of the externalities, we're not talking about like fleeting happiness. We're talking about the deeper level of happiness, being happy with your life, not in your life, right? Being able to work with a group of people on something that's truly interesting and challenging, and then achieving that and doing that over and over again, that actually can make you very happy. And then as you do that, you learn more, you grow. And so I think your point about I did a lot of courses, and I did, in Ogilvy, my whole job was learning about other people, other cultures, other things that I didn't know about. I love learning. I just didn't like sitting in a classroom. I still don't. Learning is one of those things. The happiest people are lifelong learners, are people who see an opportunity constantly to get something out of a situation. And maybe, failure is learning, right? Like if you do something that doesn't work, okay, but you've learned something new. Right. And so bring all of that together and bundle that with, well, how can we make the place that you have to go to for work anyway? Because we basically did a B2B2E model where we sell to a business, but our service is for the employee. Right. So for that employee, that mostly Gen Z employee in Vietnam, 1/3 are Gen Zs in the workforce, how can we give them another point of view? And so we would basically do what those companies at that stage, when you're in a co-working space, you have 5 to 30, 40 people at that stage wouldn't do, which is, well, we're going to invest in your well-being. We're going to invest in your personal development. We're going to invest in like getting you to meet new people and build better relationships and helping you get to where you want to be.
Which is also interesting from a cultural perspective, because that isn't completely aligned with the Asian culture in the workplace.
Not at all. So it was a bit contrarian, obviously. Right. But that is what the Gen Zs were really looking for, right? What the Gen Zs really wanted was that, okay, I'm now here. I got to write my own story. Like I cannot just follow blindly the path that people have taken before me. And in a fast developing country like Vietnam, you cannot even relate with someone who's 5 years older, because 5 years is a massive gap when things are running so quickly.
For sure.
So they come into the workforce and they say, okay, what's this going to be like for me? And in Vietnam, you see very clearly that, they've given up on this idea of a career. If they can do 3 months here, 3 months there, do a project on the side, work 2 jobs, right? That is fine. So it's kind of like all the Gen Z stereotypes, but on steroids. And so how can we support that, right? Like how can we make those, let's say 6 months or 12 months in a company, how can we make those truly valuable? And the business idea behind it, because that was the flaw in my first model of how do you monetize it. If people get so much out of their workplace, if they get so much out of being in that company, maybe they'll stick around longer. If employers keep their employees longer and they're more motivated and more tuned in and more understanding and developing quicker, then that's a great proposition to stay within our physical environment.
Then the pandemic happens and people aren't in the co-working spaces anymore. You're running DreamPlex all through the pandemic. And I do remember that Vietnam, it was pretty lax and then restrictive, but that was further down the line.
So 2 things happened at the same time. First of all, I had been talking with the partner who brought me into that company about eventually taking over. So that was already in the plan for quite a while. Then as that happened, we got into the most severe lockdown of that whole period. So Vietnam, exactly like you said, Sophie, was really lax in the beginning. Actually, they were extremely strict, but very targeted. We border China to the north. They basically literally surrounded certain villages. You could not go in, you could not go out. People were supplied food by the army. It was the most severe lockdown you can imagine. And therefore, for the first 9 months where COVID was going wild everywhere else, we had 100 cases. 100 cases in 9 months in a country of 100 million people. We planned for a bunch of scenarios. We went into a 4-month full lockdown. So of course, yes, everyone canceled their memberships and, we had 5 locations up and running. So it was crisis management, day and night, trying to solve it in the best way that we could. But we got through it somehow. The COVID period has taught us that, in those 4 months, there were so many companies in Vietnam where they didn't even have a cloud server. Like if you needed a file, you needed to go into the office, you needed to get it from a computer. Right? They were not using cloud service. They were not using SaaS software. Everything was local and mostly paper files. So a lot of things in Vietnam still to this day have to be printed, signed, and stamped with the company stamp. And there's only one person has the stamp. So we were using couriers with letters to show to the checkpoints, to show to the police that this document has to go from here to here because it was super crucial for XYZ. In those months, every company had to find a way, just like everywhere else in the world, to go from a fully paper-based, on-site, on-premise kind of way of working
automate
to like,
digitalize.
wait, we have files on the cloud. So just like how the rest of the world started learning Zoom, a lot of companies started learning how to use Google Drive or like a Microsoft OneDrive. Yeah. And so coming out of that, and that's obviously where also internationally we started seeing that shift of, maybe we don't have to be in an office all the time. And maybe there are these companies that we can take a page out of their playbook. People always wanted flexibility. They always wanted to not be in, an hour of motorbike commute. People are exhausted by the time you get to the office.
Right.
And so there was a lot of talk about hybrid work and about giving, the flexibility that all of a sudden we saw we could do it. Unfortunately, none of that materialized. Like the moment that we fully opened back up, even the companies that were doing a lot of talking about how they were going to go hybrid and how it was going to be a new era and that was going to be their main value proposition to employees, they all went back. And a couple of months ago, there was a study that came out which showed that even out of early stage startups, 80% is full-time in the office.
It didn't surprise me that a lot of that happened in Asia. However, Singapore, in its very methodical and research-driven way, absolutely did not. From a research basis, asking executives and employees have gone with flexibility as being the way forward. They see that as being the way that things need to be in the future of work. However, most Asian countries, we see from the research, that have the fewest days working from home in hybrid situations. Why do you think that is? And do you see that now changing over time?
I don't see it changing. First of all, it's really difficult to understand from the outside, but even Southeast Asia, which is a fairly small region, there's so many extreme differences between countries. So it's very difficult to say that like something in Singapore, which is literally an hour flight away from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, that those two countries have anything in common. There's obviously some culture in common, but it's so different. Like I love that you're highlighting it because with Singapore, the government has always looked at what is going to be our way. 60 years ago, Singapore was a fisher's village. There was nothing there. And then someone stood up and said, we're going to make this a global stage. Singapore is going to be known. And they did it with really smart regulation, really smart tax treaties, and really smart ways to say for companies, if you're going to be in Asia, don't put your headquarters in Hong Kong, put your headquarters in Singapore and do all your business from here. So it attracted all the banks, all the consultancies, all the businesses that bring in the money.
And they were small, so they could as well.
And they were very smart. And again, it's like a startup, right? You have to go against the big guys. So you have to hook people, right? And so, okay, this works. I think very similar with COVID. They have always been thinking about, okay, what's that next thing? So maybe in the 70s and 80s, it was these like really crazy tax schemes where, you could live in Singapore and only pay 10% tax. Then they really started getting into IT. So they were super early globally in being a digital nation, like digitizing all of the government services, doing everything online. And I think, again, they just saw it as another opportunity to really stand out in the world market. Okay, if all of Asia is going this way, if everyone is going to zig, we're going to zag.
Right.
We're going to become the flexible country. And again, starting with the government. So the government was the first one. They did a lot of content at that time, like a lot of like branded content in newspapers about how government departments were digitizing and making flexible work possible.
Yeah.
And again, it was already a much more digital economy, maybe even more so than many mature markets. All the companies were fully digitized. That was already a push from like 10, 20 years ago. And so all the building blocks were there.
Sure.
And then when you contrast that with Vietnam, the companies individually were never really digital. We've only been working in a professional setting in the last 20 years in Vietnam. So it's very hard to sprint from that into, we're just going to trust you to do your work no matter where you are. I mean, that's a great thing to say. But to be honest, people aren't ready for it.
That is what we're seeing in the US.
Yeah.
That trust is probably the biggest problem. Trust is such a core issue with managers and leaders at every level.
I think in more mature markets, I think people have proven during COVID that they can be trusted and that 99 out of 100, if you are clear about what people need to do and you give them a reason to be excited about the work that they do. Let's not forget that that's also important. They feel motivated, they feel excited, they feel part of something, and you have interesting work for them to do. I think they'll do it, right? I think that's what people have proven. I just think that certain markets are not quite there yet, because if you don't even have an older sibling who has grown up in doing an office job, in doing knowledge work, if you're just transitioning out of agricultural, F&B, hospitality, and you're just maybe the first generation who actually does knowledge work, there is so much to be learned. And that doesn't happen. I think like COVID was a huge accelerant for many, many markets. But I think the reason why in Vietnam there became much bigger push for going back to the office is because even on the employee side would agree that I don't have discipline to work at home. Like when I'm at home, I don't get my work done. And we've done Gen Z studies. We surveyed people. That's always the answer. If there isn't someone to look over my shoulder, if there isn't someone to check my work, why would I be working? And there isn't that sort of like, oh, like we are all used to, okay, the trade-off in work is that you get salary for doing this and this job, and you want to do it at least to some level of, people are happy with the work that you do. It's just not really there yet. And therefore, it's not to say that it will never happen. But I did a panel on hybrid work, and there was a fantastic chief people officer, Alexis Pham, there, who reminded me that we are so early. And again, she is Vietnamese, and she runs a multi-thousand person organization. She reminded me how early that country is in this shift from manual labor to a knowledge economy.
Yes.
And before everyone is settled into that new way of working, the new way of working there is that you have a computer to work with, and that files are digital, and that you technically can sit in different places, and then how do you control, how do you manage?
And you have internet at home, which is necessary.
Yep.
Internet or Wi-Fi at home, and you have a laptop, and those are not necessarily given for so many Vietnamese households, I would imagine.
The most typical situation is that you're in a house with 8 to 10 people, because you're typically living with your parents and your grandparents and your kids, and everyone is running around, and you're sitting at the kitchen table trying to have a call.
My guess would be, having spent much time in Asia, that the industriousness of Gen Z is not missing at all. It is
not at
that
all. Not at all.
If you're sitting with 7 other plus family members around you, that is an environment which is not supportive. So from DreamSpace, you have put the focus on happiness as being the essence of your mission together with the future of work. And you're now focusing very much on AI as well. How does AI fit into all of that?
I mean, I think we can look at it from two sides anyway. But I would say that mostly there's definitely an opportunity for all of us to be happier at work. All the ingredients and tools, they are already here. And I think a lot of the times when we look at individual people, and we've talked a bit about big organization versus small organization. But at the end of the day, you are someone in an organization. So first of all, the call to action needs to be to yourself.
Right.
What do I need to flourish, right? Like, what do I need to feel that the 100,000 hours that I'm spending at work over the course of my lifetime are additive, are contributing to my sense of purpose, like my sense of I'm making the best out of my time. If you're in an organization where people don't trust you and where the way of managing is very toxic and poisonous, then, well, first of all, get out, right? I think that's number one. Yes. And I think a lot of people then run into, but if I do that, then I don't have enough money for X, Y, Z. And I think that's when we come back to something I think we talked about just before recording. If you set yourself up where your minimum cost of living is $200K a year, you're basically now a slave to the system, right? So I think number one is that everyone has the tools to try and, keep their lifestyle expenses minimum, in a sense that, like, no matter what happens, you can cover them, and you don't need to work like some crazy job. So in a way, we're chaining ourselves to a system and then complain that the system is terrible. I think that's number one. So one is a bit of an inventory of, like, where do you stand and how can you redesign it? Which, again, I'm not saying as a theoretical thing, like that's exactly what I did, right? I saw that it was really interesting to be the CEO of a company, but it also came with a lot of inflexibility in terms of you do need to be there for your people, and you do need to attract new talent, and you do need to manage a business, and all those things together were not giving me what I needed to spend time with my son and spend time with my family and again, focus on learning and focus on doing. So I think that's one thing that people individually need to look at. What do I truly need? If I would hear tomorrow that I have 1 week left, what would I do in that week? And can I somehow make that's the thing I'm going to be doing for the next couple of years, right? Because to be honest, we never know when it's all going to end, right?
Sure.
To keep it on a positive note, then within that, you have to choose where are you going to work, right? So where are you going to find your place where there is a good trade-off between the money that you're getting that you need for the things that you truly want and truly need and what you have to do in return, right? And again, if you go in with the right motivation, the right mindset, and you find a place like that, then that place needs to be optimized exactly like you said to fit with you, right? And that's like sometimes there are imbalances in terms of it's an employer market, it's an employee market, but ideally you would find something where there's a good fit between what you need and again make those needs a bit lower. That makes the negotiation a lot easier. But what you need and what the company needs, right? Can you find some equilibrium? I think too much it's like us versus them. And having been on both sides, I feel that is an unwinnable war, right? You have to find where you're going, like your unique talents and your unique skills and what fuels you and what gets you up in the morning, your ikigai, that somehow also contributes to what the company wants, right?
Yeah.
If you do what the company wants, and I think that's also where people, a lot of the times, I realize people just don't understand how companies work and how companies make money. And therefore, we get really annoyed that companies don't want us to do X, Y, Z. It's like, yeah, but that's not going to contribute to the company growing or the company at least sustaining. So, of course, why would a company do that, right? So then those companies can be set up in a way to then facilitate you to do that work. And I think that's where obviously a lot of work is needed. And that's where we both play our roles in terms of the when, where, and how people work. And AI, the when and where is basically flexible work, hybrid work, remote work, 4-day work week, flex time. I ended up putting everyone on fully flex time. So to your point about 4-day work week that I saw you make on LinkedIn, that's exactly how I see it. I just give you a certain expectation of the work that I think can be done in the next 32 hours, when and where you do that. And we put this in all our JDs right now. When and where you do that, that's totally up to you as long as the work gets done and you can collaborate with the people that you need to collaborate with or that need to collaborate with you. So if you want to do a 40-hour hackathon over the weekends, be my guest. That's fine.
I love the fact that it's 32 hours because, of course, it's Netherlands.
And actually, most of my team obviously is global and in part in Vietnam. When I moved to Vietnam 9 years ago, the norm was 5.5 days. You would come in on Saturday morning to finish your work.
All the years I was in Hong Kong, I worked 2 Saturdays out of 3.
Yeah, and you come in and you there's literally everyone comes in Saturday morning. And it's a bit more casual. And you wear what you want, but you come there to finish your work for the week. Yep. So going from there to 32 hours is pretty good. But here's where the how comes in, because then I also say to people, and I've learned a lot from Atlassian, I want you to treat every hour as if it is money, right? As if it is like you have a budget of 32 hours. How are you going to spend those 32 hours, right? If we're just going to come in and sit and chat and talk and like. Then, I mean, you're going to spend a lot of time, but you're not necessarily productive. You're not necessarily doing work. And again, that conversation only works if our interests are aligned. Because if you love writing and I can give you a writing gig and I can do that in a very different way than a traditional media company would do it, our interests are completely aligned. You love writing, you get paid to write.
Right.
But if you're going to say, I'm going to spend the first couple of hours to catch up or read messages or, I spend a lot of time in meetings so I didn't get to X, Y, Z, then on the other side, that doesn't work for me.
So you're requiring a lot of self-awareness about, one, what makes somebody happy, but as well as key elements to my work preferences, how I work best, what my skills are, aligning myself with my skills and my strengths, which most people don't know.
Every onboarding is basically life coaching, where I'm trying to get to the core of what do you truly want? Like, what would really make you look like, if you look back 1 year from today, what would this time with us, what would it have made a win for you? I think people just don't understand how companies work. Therefore, you get all these like wrong kind of ideas and entitlements around,
very good point.
Well, the company should do X, Y, Z. It's like, but do you actually understand? And we know this as consultants. We know this as people trying to make money online. How hard it is to extract money from people. Yeah, it maybe look really easy once you're Unilever and you put a product on a shelf and it sells in large volumes, right? Do you know how hard it actually is to get money from people? To get to... You've developed software that people happily pay for every month, like a Spotify or an Atlassian. Do you know how hard it is to get to that point and then to retain them and then to fight the competition and all the bets you have to make along the way? And also, again, that there is something really at stake, right? Because if they make a mistake, like if Atlassian says we're going to go full on this, and they develop it, and it turns out to be not at all what the market wanted, and they get dropped in favor of platform X,
Right.
that's a huge issue, right? So I think, like, first of all, you need to understand from that side, how does the company actually work, right? Then I can look from my side, what do I actually want? I think most people don't know what they truly want, right? So a couple of those like very deep questions. If 2 years from today, someone makes a movie about your life, what would it be called and what would it be about? Like, what would they showcase as your journey and what you've achieved, right? Get into that mindset. Well, if that's what your movie looks like 2 years from today, where do you need to be 1.5 years from today? Where do you need to be 1 year from today? And then you can basically plan back.
Yes, and where we are now and where we're going is that intentionality that every single person needs to have, which we haven't had. We've been able to get on this rat race, a hamster wheel that we could just continue on and not have to think. We may have to make a few decisions, career change, getting married, but there weren't very many big decisions we had to make. Now we have to be very actively involved. And that intentionality, I think, is a huge shift. I think it's a very positive one, but it does take a lot of work and a lot of reflection.
Yeah, and the founder of positive psychology, Martin Seligman, he studied rats in the 1950s and 60s, and he came up with this concept of learned helplessness. And I think a lot of us are like that, where basically we have locked ourselves into a system where we feel like we are chained to whatever the system wants, and that we don't have the autonomy and the agency anymore. And obviously, if you change your framing and if you change your circumstance, I mean, it's definitely not true for everyone, but for a lot of people, there are definitely things that you can do. And so again, like going back to that idea of the how, that's also where, okay, if you're really aware of what you're trying to achieve, is sitting in a bunch of meetings, is that getting you closer to your goal, or is it steering you further away? Is spending the first 2 hours of the day catching up on Slack and getting caught into all kind of conversations, is that going to get you closer to your goal? You told me you wanted to be managing editor by mid next year. Is this going to make you managing editor? It's like, oh no, this is all really new and digital and innovative and advanced. But this is what the Stoics said 2,500 years ago, right? We are so frugal with our money and with our possessions, but we are so loose with our time. But time is our actually only non-replenishable resource. So I always go back to that point of make sure that every hour you spend in this company, every hour that you spend in this role is actually worth it for you. If you're spending it on things that are not generative, are not adding to what you're trying to achieve, are not adding to where you want to go, then it's literally a waste of time. And we don't have time to waste.
We don't. Although at the same time, time is a completely human construct.
But second to second, we still need to live and choose.
We do.
How we live our seconds is how we live our lives.
So is that one of the drivers for you, having so much focus now on AI and learning that?
Absolutely.
So that is to be able to understand and absorb and utilize the benefits of these new technologies. The next 2-3 years are undoubtedly filled with extraordinary change. Are there particular patterns or directions that you are imagining in this future of work environment, and how those are going to change people's jobs and roles and tasks that they're assigned?
So here's the interesting thing about AI. It's both great technology and it's not technology. The number one thing that I really think everyone needs to get across is that this is a new coworker, right? This is a new teammate. This is not software, right? Software is very logical, right? When you learned how to transition from doing manual slides to writing PowerPoints, you could teach someone, you install this program, then you click on file, you click on new, and this is what you do, and that's how you make a PowerPoint. AI is trained on human language. So it's a completely open world. It's a completely open interface, and it can understand you, and therefore it can do things that normally you would do. And so when you look at the portion of the work that is toil, that is the things that we actually don't like doing, that are non-additive, they're not generative, they're not getting us to where we want to be, it is actually almost 9 out of 10 times the stuff that AI is very good at, right? So it is answering messages, it is answering questions, it is sitting in meetings, it is writing emails, all the stuff that we don't like to do, scheduling, all these things, all this administrative work. If you look at the research from BCG, the whole Joy at Work study, it's basically showing that the things we hate doing the most is the stuff that AI is really good at. And AI doesn't care to do it because they happen to be very good at it, right?
Yeah, right.
There's no emotion. There's no...
Not yet, but yeah.
This is not just like software where you can learn how to use a program and then you're learning it, right? The truth is it's a learning community and we are all studying together and you're finding out things, you're sharing with the group and I'm finding out things and I'm sharing with the group. I can give you a base understanding. But even Sam Altman has said, I don't know how ChatGPT works, right? So we're all learning this in real time. So see it as a coworker and see it as a coworker that first and foremost can take over all the parts of your job that you don't like doing and they're not getting you closer to your goal. There has nothing been like this before. So the main thing here is that you can let AI take over all that work and that immediately frees up your time to what I've just told my team, we're going to split the difference. Right. You're going to get a day less of work per week, right? That's the 40 to 32 hours.
Right.
And then the other side is that we're going to split the difference. You're going to get 32 hours of work per week instead of 40 hours. But in that 32 hours, you can be much more productive because you're much more focused because you're not stuck in the administrative stuff that is not contributing anyway, right? I think University of Carolina showed that I think a third of meetings that we're in are completely nonsense. Like we don't need to be there. We don't need to sit in that meeting. So an AI can take it over. So that's even in the next 2 to 3 years, that's going to be the big transition for everyone to understand that this is just a new team member who can take over work from them and who can make work a lot more interesting. Number two is then the more advanced people like you are starting to see that this can also be not just like a junior team member taking over work that we don't want to do. It can start to be a senior advisor. It can be someone that co-creates with you, right? Like we all experience certain points in our day or in our week where we're kind of on our own. And of course, we could maybe ring that colleague, maybe working on something late and they're not available. AI is always there. So then people who are getting into a bit more advanced are starting to hand over or collaborate on much more advanced things at work, right? So that will happen in the next 2 to 3 years. Longer term, and this is uneasy to think about, longer term is really hard to imagine that there's anything that we can do as humans that AI cannot do. Because we both had kids. We see how kids learn. At 3 years old, my son is not going to, recite Shakespeare. There are things that he will do later in life that he cannot do right now, but he already has so much more intelligence or knowledge than he did 3 years ago. So if these systems keep learning and they do it at a much faster pace, obviously, and the acceleration is much higher, it will be really hard to imagine that they wouldn't get to a point where everything we can do digitally, everything we can do on a computer, this whole economy that we've built around knowledge work, around doing things digitally online, that an AI eventually can do that. So what we then get to, which is really interesting to think about, especially in the context of raising kids right now, would be, well, so what are the things that are going to remain valuable? What are the things that people can still do? But that's going to be a long time away. And I think for most people that we speak to, they can finish out their career in a normal way, but they can do it supported by AI.
Ooh, that's a cliffhanger.
Sam Altman, I think, said, what we will see from ChatGPT within this year will make everything we've seen in the last year and a half, which has been the biggest breakthrough in anything that we've seen in our lifetimes probably. But he said, I will be embarrassed by what we've released before. And he said, we will see that within this year.
We cannot even imagine what this landscape is going to be. That's fascinating for me. For a manager, a leader who wants to change the dynamic for their team, their department, and the company as a whole, happiness, as you're saying, comes from the person, supported by the culture of the team or environment. How can they help change the dynamics to have happier and more advanced workplaces?
Well, I'll borrow a line from you on the practical point, which is listen to people and be empathetic towards people. On a practical note, and this is what every HR team and every employee engagement, employee experience team is working on, is doing surveys, listening to people, understanding where it breaks down, where are the frustrations, how can you make it better? And this is also where, consultancy goes into a company. And I had a great interview with Matt Kropp from BCGX. They go into a company and they just look at a workflow and they interview people who are doing that workflow repeatedly and they look end to end. Where's the joy? Where's the toil? And you can optimize. And again, that's where they do it through AI. But you can then say, okay, what parts can AI take over? What parts do you do? And you can improve work a lot by just mapping out the problems and solving them, whether that's through a culture change or a leadership change or through introducing technology like AI, you can optimize workflows very easily just by listening, mapping out the problem, solving the problems, right? The other part is a much bigger one. And that's, I think, where we get a bit into the bigger question of, can big companies, these big oil tanker companies that are already on that path and they're charting their course, can they actually change? Because it has to start with the leadership. Like, it has to start with someone who is in charge, or a group of people who are in charge, who say, time is too precious to waste it on bullshit. We're going to create a company that does something really interesting with really interesting people, and we're going to have fun while we do it. Can a really big company that is already, they have so many stakeholders, maybe they're public, maybe they have to make the shareholders happy, can they actually make the change? As the consultants, we would always say, oh, there's this case, there's this case. But for 99% of the companies, can they do it? I'm not sure. But for smaller companies, for younger companies, for companies that are being founded right now, start at the foundation and build it around doing something interesting and doing something well, right? So if you are launching a company now, you're still in those early years where you can still make those changes, make those pivots, go back to the core. What are we actually doing and why? And if you as a leader are truly believing in that what you're doing is really meaningful, and it can be the Unilever idea of, doing good by doing well, you can make good products or deliver good services and still make great money. But can you truly say that that's what you're doing? Because if you solve that problem, then everything falls in line pretty easily, and then you can just optimize on the executional layer. But if you're starting from a rotten core where there isn't really a purpose or mission behind your company, and there isn't really anything other than, well, I just took this over from this CEO, and we have to make 10% more revenue this year. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do on the exterior, and of course, those teams will do that, and maybe they'll have fun doing that, and maybe they can make it better for people. But I don't think you can truly change it.
Thank you very much for what you've shared and the very thoughtful and focused understanding of happiness and how important that is to be infusing with the intelligence and awareness of what people are doing and how they're doing it, and how so much of it is up to them and managers and people that they're working with to support that too. But I really, really appreciate the vision that you have and the journey that you're on. And so thank you very much for sharing it.
Thanks for being on. And the last call to action for everyone, choose a better job.
Thanks again so much to Daan van Rossum, the founder and CEO of FlexOS, and host and instructor of the Lead with AI podcast, course, and community. To find out more about Daan, you can go to LinkedIn, as well as go to his website, flexos.work. Immediate action tip. To improve work experiences, go back to the core. What are you doing and why? Are you doing it well? Do you believe what you're doing is meaningful? Practically, empathize and listen to your team members, discovering the joy and toil in their workflows to map out and solve issues together. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and like it. You can also write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, curated useful articles, research and information, follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter there. Thanks for listening. Until next time.